All right, everybody, welcome back. And so we went over this a little bit at the end of class, but we kind of were rushed. So just to make sure that we are all on the same page, I'm going to do a quick little review in terms of price floors and price ceilings. Now remember, in order to do any kind of analysis of what's going on with price floors and price ceiling, we have to remember our definitions, right? Of specifically our consumer and our producer surplus. Because essentially that's telling us how well the consumer is doing, and the producer surplus, or sorry, the consumer surplus, let's go ahead and label our equilibrium. Boop. Boop. P star, Q star. And our consumer equilibrium is any point underneath this line that is above the price. So we can actually calculate it here because I've got kind of graph paper. So this is going to be a triangle that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units deep, and 1, 2, 3, 4 units wide, right? What's the area of a triangle formula? 1/2 base times height, right? Just half of a rectangle. And so we're going to do 1/2 times 4 times 5. 1/2 times 4 is 2. 2 times 5 gives us 10. So we can see that this shaded area is 10 units, or $10, or whatever the case may be. The consumer surplus is 10. Now, what if, similarly, we were to talk about the producer surplus, right? The producer surplus is the points above the supply line, right? There are people that are willing to provide the first unit at this very low price, but they are not getting that very low price. They're getting this price up here. So the producer surplus is the triangle that is above the supply curve, but below the equilibrium price. And it tells us essentially how well the producers are doing. And so once again, this is a triangle on graph paper, so we can figure out that, okay, this is a 3, this is 4, so this area here, right, again, my area of a triangle is just 1/2 base times height, so this is going to be 1/2 times 3 times 4. 1/2 of 4 is 2. 2 times 3 is going to give me 6. So I'm going to get a producer surplus equal to 6. Any questions about that? So it's any value that the producers are getting above and beyond what they're willing to sell at. Because the supply schedule is telling us what they're willing to sell at. But again, they're not actually selling at that price. They're selling at the equilibrium price. So this is essentially the kind of feel goods that the producers are getting, right? In the similar way that consumer surplus is kind of feel goods for what the consumers are getting, right? Now, when we talk about price floors and price ceilings, we are going to use these concepts to try to figure out who these policies are impacting more, right? So we're going to try to figure out, you know, is it consumer surplus or producer surplus that's changing, and how are they changing, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is a price floor. So a price floor is going to be some price that's higher than my equilibrium price. For a second, as a thought experiment, what if I had a price floor that was below my equilibrium price? What if I had a price floor? What is a price floor telling the producers and the consumers of the market, right? They're saying you cannot sell below this. Yeah, you can't sell below this. So if it's below the market price, what's it going to do? Absolutely nothing, right? So this is a non-binding price floor. And so we always, if we want to have a binding price floor, a price floor that actually does something, then we're going to want to put it above equilibrium. So our price floor above the equilibrium. And our price floor above the equilibrium, we know that that's going to create a quantity demand reflection down here and a quantity supplied reflection up here. So this is going to result in more supplied than demanded. We call this a surplus. Now, again, we're not terribly concerned about this surplus. That's just going to kind of confuse us. What we are concerned about is we're concerned about how this price floor impacts consumers and producers, right? So what's our new consumer surplus? Since this is the new equilibrium wage, essentially, the price floor is, or not wage, apologies. We keep talking about this as minimum wage. That's why I'm talking about it. But this is the minimum price that we can legally allowed to sell at, right? And so as a result, the new consumer surplus is going to be anywhere below the demand curve, but above that price floor. So my new consumer surplus is going to be this triangle here. And again, we can calculate it's 1, 2, 3 tall and about 2.5 wide. So 1/2 times 3 times 2.5. I didn't make this easy on myself. 1.5 times 2.5, which is 3.75. Yeah, mental math. So we can tell that that is down from the 10 that we had before, right? So we can tell that price floors are going to decrease consumer surplus unequivocally, right? Doesn't really matter how we draw the supply and demand graphs. The consumer surplus is just always going to shrink whenever we have a price floor. The producer surplus is a different story, right? Again, the producer surplus before was this triangle, but now since the producers are getting this price instead of the old equilibrium price, the new producer surplus is going to be this weird quadrilateral thing. And in order to get the area of this, we have to cut it up into two pieces, right? We have to get a rectangular piece, which is going to be, let me see here, 1, 2, 3.5. And then this is going to be 1, 2, let's just call that 3. And this is going to be 1. So in order to get my area of this producer surplus here, I have to do 3.5 times 3 in order to get my area of this rectangle, right? 3.5 times 3 is going to be 10.5. Excellent. Thank you, Brian. And then my area of the triangle here, right, 1/2 times 1 times 3 is going to be just 3/2, or 1.5. So we add up these together, and we end up with a producer surplus that is now equal to 12. So in this particular example, the producer surplus did increase as a result of the price floor. But again, that is going to be on a kind of case-by-case basis with how the curves are, how steep the curves are, and where that price floor is, right? But the gist of it is consumer surplus always shrinks, producer surplus changes. We don't actually know how unless we calculate it and we have graph paper and we have some actual values there. Does that make sense to everyone? What is the last piece of this puzzle that I haven't talked about yet? Quite literally a missing piece in here. No, we will get to that. Yeah, very good. The deadweight loss. Absolutely. So there is a missing piece, right? There is this part here that used to be half producer surplus and half consumer surplus and half producer surplus, but now is it's no surplus at all. And so this right here is what's called our dead weight loss. This is a surplus that we had, but now we no longer have it as a result of that policy. Does that make sense to everyone? That used to be half consumer and producer surplus. Now it's nothing because this isn't the quantity that's getting sold anymore, right? This is the new quantity that's getting sold. Whatever the quantity demanded is in a price floor is going to be the actual quantity that's supplied and quantity that's demanded under that price floor. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, awesome. Let's talk about ceilings real quick. And so again, I'm not going to do our initial consumer and producer surplus calculation just to save us some time. But whenever we have a price ceiling, it has to be below the equilibrium quantity. Oh, and the other mnemonic that I like to do with these kind of things is when you have a price floor that is properly like where it's supposed to be when it's above the equilibrium, it can, it can actually kind of function as a little dance floor, right? You can think about it and you can be drawing people up here, right? Like it's a price floor. If you did it below the equilibrium, then you wouldn't have enough room to dance or whatever, right? So that's kind of how I remember a price floor needs to be above it, because then it looks like a open ceilinged kind of floor, right? And similarly, a price ceiling has to be below the equilibrium. And again, you can kind of, especially once you reflect the quantity supplied and reflect the quantity demanded, right? You can kind of start to see that, oh, this kind of like looks like a house, right? With a window or something like that and a door, right? So, a price ceiling will literally look like the ceiling of a house in your graph. All right, so a price ceiling, what is this going to do to our producer and consumer surplus, right? Well, it's pretty easy for us to figure out what happens to our producer surplus. We once had a producer surplus that was this big, and now we have a producer surplus that is this big, right? So just easy for us to just see visually that the producer surplus is negatively impacted because of the price ceiling. Now, what about what about consumer surplus, right? Well, consumer surplus used to be this giant triangle up here. But now, as a result of this price ceiling, consumers are going to be paying this amount. And so our consumer surplus changes again to a weird quadrilateral thing that if we really wanted to, we would have to split up into a rectangular part and a triangular part in order to ascertain whether consumer surplus increased or decreased, right? And of course, there are like really annoying problems like this where consumer surplus stays exactly the same, right? So that is also something where I don't think this book is going to trick you like that, and I certainly am not going to trick you like that on the exam. But I want you to be aware that that is a possibility, right? Given, so we don't know if consumer surplus is going to increase, decrease, or perhaps, in the very rare circumstance, stay exactly the same. Any questions on price floors and ceilings, producer surplus? Oh, and then the last part, which I almost forgot, right, is our piece of the pie in the middle here. The dead weight loss. This is, producer surplus that we no longer have and consumer surplus that we no longer have. So this guy is our dead weight loss. Dead weight loss, always bad, right? It's kind of clued in by the name. All right, any questions on price ceilings, price floors before we move on to the next chapter? Solid. And I will